of this video, we are going to learn something about solvency ratios. Before I go with the formulas of solvency ratios, let us know why do we need to calculate the solvency ratios. Solvency refers to the ability of the enterprise to meet its long-term liabilities. The liabilities having maturity period of more than 1 year or operating cycle, we call it as the long-term liabilities. So solvency ratios basically helps us in determining the ability of the enterprise to meet its long-term obligations. We have 4 such solvency ratios to be calculated. 1. Debt to equity ratio. Number 2. Total assets to debt ratio. Number 3. Proprietary ratio. And number 4. Interest coverage ratio. Now let us go through the formulas one by one. The first one, debts to equity ratio. You can see the formula, that is debts upon equity. Over here debts means long-term debts and equity refers to shareholders fund or proprietors fund or net worth. These are the different names for equity. What are the components of debts or non-current liabilities? In the formula, we already seen that it is debts upon equity. Debts over here refers to long-term borrowings. Long-term borrowings includes bonds, debentures, term loans, deposits, loans and advances, etc. Whereas long-term provisions include the provision for employee benefits, provision for warranties payable after 1 year basically. Over here, one needs to take care that any current maturity of long-term borrowing will be a part of other current liabilities. It may happen that debentures are redeemable in installments. Term loans are there, which are also redeemable in installments, which may be, right? So any such redemption which is going to take place within next 12 months is a part of other current liability that will not be included in long-term debts. What is included in shareholders fund, proprietors fund or net worth? So basically it includes share capital and reserves and surplus. But again the question comes to what is included in share capital? Share capital will include equity share capital, preference share capital. What are the amount has been mentioned in subscribed capital in notes to accounts, that has to be considered over here. Apart from that, we have reserves and surplus also. In reserves and surplus, we know like all profits and reserves are there. Starting with the capital reserve, capital redemption reserve, DRR refers to debenture redemption reserve, securities premium reserve, general reserve and statement of P&L. Again the point to be taken care of over here is for statement of P&L, whether it has a debit balance or a credit balance will have to be recorded over here. We have different formulas to calculate shareholders fund, which we will go through while solving the sums. It can be the total assets minus total debts. Now what is total assets? Total assets, we all know that is non-current assets plus current assets, and total debts is non-current liabilities and current liabilities. So first formula, total assets minus total debts. In the second formula you can see there like total assets is equal to non-current assets plus current assets and minus non-current liabilities and current liabilities. And we all know very well that current assets minus current liability is working capital. So another formula may be like non-current assets plus working capital minus non-current liability. It depends on the sum what kind of information is given to us. Accordingly, we need to apply the formula. This is a balance sheet in T-shape, the horizontal form, which we all have learned in class 11. In class 12, we learn about the company accounts. And in companies, T-shaped balance sheet is not allowed as per Companies Act 2013. All the companies are supposed to prepare the balance sheet in the vertical format. But I have presented this to you just to make your process of doing the sums easy. We all know that on equity and liability side, we have four main heads or major heads: shareholders funds, SAMPA, non-current liability and current liability. And on the asset side, we have non-current assets and current assets. So representing you this balance sheet or making you learn this balance sheet, the T-shaped balance sheet, the reason behind this is just to make you understand that it will be very easy for us to remember the formulas. SAMPA has been marked with red over here. This shows that, or this indicates that SAMPA is not a part of syllabus for class 12 right now. So that's why it has been marked with red over here. In none of the sums you will come across such a term. So otherwise, liability side, what have we left out? Shareholders fund, non-current liability and current liability. On the asset side, we have non-current assets and current assets. Again, I repeat my words. This is just to make the process easy for the calculations of the ratios. This type of balance sheet is not at all allowed by the Companies Act 2013 now. The second formula which is there under this head, that is total assets to debt ratio. Total assets upon long-term debts is the formula. Debts over here will refer to long-term debts. Total assets, we know that it is non-current assets plus current assets, whereas long-term debts will include the long-term liabilities and long-term provisions, long-term borrowings and long-term provisions. Total assets will include non-current assets plus current assets. Non-current assets will include all the tangible assets, intangible assets, non-current investments, long-term loans and advances, and whereas current assets will include the CIT, CSO, that is current investments, inventories, trade receivables, cash and cash equivalents, short-term loans and advances, and other current assets. Long-term debts will basically include the long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. The third formula is on the screen now. Proprietary ratio. Proprietary ratio is proprietors fund or shareholders funds or net worth upon total assets. We already have gone through the formulas for shareholders fund earlier, and total asset is also well known to us now, that is non-current assets plus current assets. Interest coverage ratio, or it is also known as debt service ratio. The formula for the same is profit before interest and tax upon interest on long-term debts. This formula is very important. Interest coverage ratio, I repeat, interest coverage ratio is equal to profit before interest and tax upon interest on long-term debts. Profit before interest and tax, or EBIT or PBIT, okay, this includes the profit of the enterprise before providing for interest on long-term loans and before charging tax provisions. When we will be going to the numericals, at that time I'll let you know what amount of profit is given, whether the profit is before interest and tax or profit is before tax or profit is after interest and tax. So that thing has to be taken care of. So we just need to take care that whenever we solve the sums, at that time we need to have the profit before interest and tax. The second term is interest on long-term debts. So long-term debts basically includes the long-term borrowings. So any interest on such long-term borrowings will be a part of interest on long-term debts. Long-term borrowings may be in the form of debentures, long-term loans, bank loans, loan from financial institutions, public deposits, term loan, etc. Right? So any interest on such borrowings will be the interest on long-term debts. Another formula which can be very useful for solving the sums of solvency ratios: capital employed. Capital employed will include the shareholders funds plus non-current liabilities if you go through the liabilities approach, and if you go with the assets approach, it is non-current assets plus current assets minus current liabilities. We all know that non-current assets plus current assets is equal to total assets, so that can be written that way also, total assets minus current liabilities. And one more fact known to us is working capital. Working capital is current assets minus current liabilities. So formula can be like non-current assets plus working capital. This is a table which will be very handy for solving the sums, basically for interest coverage ratio. The companies normally prepare the table like this at the end of the year as a part of the statement of P&L. Profit before interest and tax less interest on long-term borrowings. I have assumed over here the rate as 10%. We'll get profit before tax, and from profit before tax we need to deduct tax at the rate of like 50%, again assumed 50%, and after that we get the profit after interest and taxes. Over here we need to assume profit before tax as 100, and then what are the tax rate is there, as like over here I have taken at 50%, so that 50% tax will be deducted, so profit after interest and tax is 50%. And with the help of this table we will be able to calculate the profit before interest and tax. We will learn this while doing the sums. Thank you.